welcome, both live and in person, as well as to those that get a chance to check this out after the fact. If I haven't had a chance to meet you yet, my name is Bobby Lauer, and I'm the Executive Director for the Coalition of Urban and Metropolitan Universities. I am going to briefly turn it over to my partner, Katie Parker, who is here with the Democracy Collaborative. And I think everybody on the webinar knows that the Democracy Collaborative is CUMU's key partner in launching our new Anchor Learning Network. And this webinar is really, I think, our first official initiative related to ALN. And we're so excited that we've had such a positive response from the members of CUMU about this topic that we're talking about today, and as well as about all the work related to digging in on the Anchor mission. So I think we have 30 minutes for today's webinar. We did talk before we got started that if the Q&A runs a little bit over, that Katie does have the capacity to stick around a little bit. So please wait and use the question and answer function if you do have something you want to ask. And otherwise, you know that we're always available offline as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Katie, who will be leading us through the webinar as well as closing it out. So thank you so much for being here.
Great, thanks so much, Bobby. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Katie Parker, and I'm with the Democracy Collaborative. And I've had the opportunity at the Collaborative to work pretty extensively with our Anchor institution programs, so working with hospitals, universities, colleges, other large place-based institutions around this idea of the Anchor mission and leveraging all assets to support community wealth building. So I'll just go ahead and share my screen. And today's webinar will be focused on developing a working goal. And I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like for the Anchor Learning Network and some best practices that we've seen across Anchor institutions with the Democracy Collaborative, and provide a little bit of background information as to why we think this process of developing a meaningful working goal is so important. So as a little bit of background, everyone on this call is a member of the Anchor Learning Network, which grew out of the Higher Education Anchor Mission Initiative. So many of you have already gone through the process of developing working goals. But the Anchor Learning Network is really focused on learning from each other, but making sure that learning can turn into action. So we have a goal to ensure that all areas of the university, including business and administrative divisions, are working towards the overall public mission of higher education to improve the social, economic, and physical health of our campuses and communities. So we've asked every participant in the Anchor Learning Network to come up with a working goal for their Anchor work. So something that can guide all the Anchor strategies, be it procurement, hiring, investment, wherever you're focusing, but some sort of milepost for the year. And each participant, we're asking to either provide a goal or update goals every 6 months. And our hope is that these goals can help align priorities and communicate what you're doing as part of the Anchor Learning Network to people on your campus, as well as the external partners that you might be engaging with. The content of the goals, we'll be collecting them from you, and this will provide a focus for our programming together, so we can make sure that the time when we're in person is really geared at what people are working on. And we also will use the goals to figure out what might be missing, what tools, templates, or resources might be helpful for you to help realize some of the goals. So this idea of working goals, why do we think it's important to get specific about what you're working on campus? The idea of the Anchor mission is pretty broad. It's to leverage all assets of the university. So it's kind of hard to dig in if you're not getting clear on what you're talking about. It's really easy to kind of stay in the theoretical realm without getting concrete about the strategies and interventions. So our hope is, again, to move to action, and that by naming what you're working on, it will help us to do that. We also think that articulating a goal can help to build momentum on campus and connect it to existing initiatives you might be a part of, be it connecting it to the Carnegie classification, sustainability goals on campus, your strategic plan, but actually naming what you're working on can help people that might not be as familiar with the term anchor mission to kind of see their own work reflected in what you're doing. We're also really interested in measuring what matters. So by identifying a goal, that will help you to identify how you're going to understand if you're actually having the impact on campus and in your community that you want to see. And then we also think having a collection of what all the campuses are doing as part of the initiative can really help make the case as to why anchor mission work is important and impactful. And we'll have a pretty powerful collection of what's going to happen across campuses. So we use a methodology around collaboration that we've learned from co-creative consulting, which helps with a lot of our anchor networks. And really the first goal or the first step for collaboration is to develop a shared goal that people can kind of see themselves in. So the rest of the webinar will be focused on how you can pick a powerful goal or adapt what you're already working on. So this is a little bit, I'm sure a lot of folks are familiar with kind of the SMART goal methodology, and this is a little bit different. We are adding this kind of aspirational, inspirational piece to it. So the idea is to develop a goal that kind of unlocks thinking, and so it might not necessarily be easy to accomplish, but it will be powerful if you do accomplish it. So we hope that these goals can help inspire commitment on campus, so it's something that people think is important and meaningful. It's a goal that will require a shift in how you're doing things so that it's not just a one-time result, but you're developing systems, be it developing a committee or changing your strategic plan so that this goal will live beyond an individual initiative or strategy. And we're also hoping that people will focus on things that can't just be solved by one particular solution. So it's not as easy as we will get this grant. We also think working goals are powerful when it involves multiple people. So picking a goal that you can't accomplish on your own, but will involve building partnerships, be that with different departments on campus, be it with new community-based organizations, but something where you're bringing in more assets and more people. And the goal should be clear enough that everyone at the table, even if they're not familiar with your day-to-day work, can see their own work reflected in it, so it should speak to them. An example of this in some of the Democracy Collaborative's other work is with a collaboration we have around scaling employee ownership, so trying to increase the number of worker-owned cooperatives and employee-owned businesses. And there's a lot of different organizations that work in different parts of that employee ownership ecosystem. There's people who work on technical assistance, there's actual co-ops, there's trade associations, and there's an initiative that the Democracy Collaborative is a part of that really started with the question, how can we move the needle on employee ownership? And they came up with a working goal of having 50 million employee owners by the year 2050. It's very audacious, that's a lot of people, but it is time bound, and so they can begin to backtrack by 2050 and think if we're really going to reach that significant a number of people, what needs to shift? And rather than taking the goal literally, they're asking the question, what would it take to get to 50 million employee owners by the year 2050? And that's unlocked some pretty big thinking in terms of the partnerships that need to be developed and the longer term movement building that needs to happen. And at the same time, they're able to enact individual strategies that move the needle in the short term by focusing on what all those organizations are already doing. So looking at how this plays out on campuses, we might have a shorter time frame than 2050, and we are asking people to set their goals within the duration of the initiative, so 1 to 3 years out. So a little bit shorter term, but we do want you to do the same things around being time-bound, audacious, specific, and meaningful. So this is an example of a goal from Hopkins Local, and they set a goal that 40% of new hires for targeted positions come from Baltimore neighborhoods and selected zip codes by 2018. So 40% is a pretty audacious goal. They're being specific in that it's not listed in this goal, but they've named actual position categories that they'll be looking at. It's meaningful because they've defined local as specific areas surrounding their campus, and those are the zip codes that they're focusing other initiatives in. And it's time-bound. They hope to do this by 2018, and I believe they did surpass this goal. And so this goal is different than saying we're going to identify baseline measures for local hires by job type. Even though those might get you to the same place, if you had that goal, you might have ended up with new hires in targeted positions in specific zip codes, but it would be hard to measure progress. Another example is integrating the anchor strategy into a strategic plan and getting sign-off by senior leadership. Again, there's an end date. It's audacious in that it will have a meaningful impact. It's specific in that it's naming the document, and it's meaningful in that if senior leadership is bought in, anchor strategies will probably go a lot farther. And this is different than just saying we will engage senior leadership, because you can actually tell if you were successful at the end. If you set a working goal of we will engage senior leadership, then maybe one meeting would be enough to check that, and it doesn't necessarily have the next steps outlined. This is another one that pertains to multi-anchor collaboratives. So by 2020, we will place 2,020 new workers in jobs, and it involves multiple anchors. So rather than just saying that they'll gain support from other anchor institutions, they've named those institutions, and they've named what support looks like. It means job placement. And by adding the specific numbers and timeline, there's a way to measure progress on the goal and maybe reorient. Say within 1 year, so in 2019, they realize that actually they're set up to far surpass that goal. They can raise it, or maybe it's actually a lot more challenging than they thought, and they're able to adjust. So we asked all the participants of the Higher Education Anchor Mission Initiative to come up with goals last year, and we did an activity where we put them all up around the room and kind of did a round robin review of everyone's goals. And there were some that were program focused, so they were focused on those specific anchor strategies related to local procurement, hiring, anti-displacement, real estate development, things like that. There were a lot of goals that were focused on building the infrastructure on campus. So how can you institutionalize anchor mission work by things like setting up committees, getting senior leadership buy-in, integration into strategic plans. And we saw a lot of people kind of taking that infrastructure approach. And then there were a number of goals related to education. So be it understanding your own data, we are going to focus on understanding what our potential local procurement would be, or related to educating partners on campus about the anchor mission. So for 2019, we're asking each campus to develop a new working goal or to update the one that you might have started in 2018. And we've provided some examples based on some of the existing goals that extrapolate out a little further. So an example of a goal for local procurement might be by 2020, the university will procure 10% of total goods and services from minority-owned businesses within specific counties. And so you can imagine that with this goal, there's a lot of strategies that fall under that. You could do things like create a database of local minority-owned vendors and circulate that with departments. You could shift your RFP process and include local procurement goals in formal contracting documents and work around subcontracting. We've seen campuses engage their student governments and get student groups to work with local caterers. And so by setting the goal broad enough that you're talking about goods and services, you can involve a lot of departments and players on campus, not just supply chain, although they'll be a crucial part of the puzzle. With local hiring, this is modeled off of the Hopkins local example, but you can set a specific percentage of hires from targeted neighborhoods and do an analysis of what positions are actually ones that need either additional training or recruitment, and make sure that your goal is also able to meet the HR needs of your colleagues. And so this goal might involve initially some data analysis of what are those positions, what is a reasonable number. But we encourage people to kind of throw spaghetti at the wall. It doesn't need to be a perfect number, and you can, once you start working on the initiative, adjust over time. So if you're not sure what's realistic for local hiring, for example, maybe just pick 40% and see how you do. We've also seen some goals related to building out some of the connections across campus. So this is one about engaging business college faculty in local procurement programming. And so this might help to build student and faculty engagement around the anchor mission, and also make some tangible impact related to an existing local procurement goal. So if you already have a working goal that you're pretty happy with, maybe think about what's the next step of increasing impact and engagement on campus, and make that your goal for 2019. Like I said, there are a lot of goals related to integrating the anchor mission approach within existing infrastructure and processes on campus. So for some people, that might be getting it in the strategic plan. For some people, that might be ensuring that the president's office is aware of and participating in the initiative. This will kind of look different based on what's happening for you. If there's a big construction project planned, maybe it's involved in kind of the capital planning process. But if you do have a goal related to building buy-in, we encourage you to get pretty specific about the documents that you're talking about. And also who needs to sign off. So not enough just to say senior leadership, but if that's the president you want to get involved, then actually naming that. We're also asking people to decide how you'll determine if you're successful on your goal. So identifying which of the data points as part of the anchor dashboard will you be seeing progress on, and are there any additional things you want to measure to tell if you're successful? You'll also want to decide who needs to be involved. If you're going to be successful at this, what additional community partners need to be at the table? What departments on campus do you not currently have relationships with that would make your work more effective? And we're also asking people to think about how the goal relates to the critical shifts of the initiative. So we've kind of done some brainstorming around where do we need to move the needle in order to see greater implementation of anchor strategies on campuses. And the group has decided that advancing racial equity, so making sure that anchor strategies are addressing racial disparities, student and faculty integration. If we're going to be successful, we need to see how anchor strategies relate to curricular engagement, senior leadership engagement, and then collaborating with community partners. So as you develop your goals, kind of think of those 4 categories and how they might show up. So we are asking everyone to set a goal for fiscal year 2020, going from July 1st to June 30th. So different than the calendar year, but we'll reset our programming on the fiscal year, which also aligns with your data collection. So we'll be integrating this goal setting process as part of the bigger anchor dashboard benchmarking and metrics process. So the Democracy Collaborative will be doing some outreach to you when the data is due for the Anchor dashboard, and we'll also be asking you for updates on your working goal and to see if there are any additional metrics that you'll be tracking related to that. We've developed a template for people to use. This might look familiar for those who have been at our in-person convenings, but it's a worksheet that asks you to name your goal and then to set some milestones along the way. So the categories are: what will you be doing to make progress on your goal in that month? Who will you need to engage? And how will you engage them? And as you're answering the how, we invite you to think through some of the programming of the Anchor Learning Network, be it in-person convenings, support group calls, webinars, reaching out to your peers, and think about how this network can support you in reaching those goals. And if you have ideas on that, we'll be reading through these and can be sure to integrate that into our programming. And also be sure to connect people with similar goals so that you don't need to reinvent the wheel and you can brainstorm related to that. So this template was emailed out to everyone, and we'll email it, and it's fill-inable if you type up, but also feel free to write it and scan it to me and I can type it up. But we would like you to decide by June. So over the month of May, we encourage you to kind of come up with some straw man goals and test them. Ask people who you're working with, what would we need to accomplish this? Do you think this is a powerful goal? And workshop some ideas with them. And then we will make the goal kind of the focus of some of the technical assistance calls that the Democracy Collaborative provides over the year, and we'll also workshop some of them at our convenings, be they virtual support group calls or our in-person time together at the CUMA conference. Lastly, we want to encourage you to think about how your working goals relate to other strategic initiatives on campus. So there are Anchor metrics integrated into the Carnegie Community Engagement Classification. Anchor work is included in the Campus Compact civic action plans. Things like the federal designation of promise neighborhoods, having this Anchor work could help with that. So think about both what's happening on your campus and in your geography. Are there any existing multi-Anchor partnerships that you might be able to plug in with and scale impact? So that is all the material on goals, and we wanted to leave time to talk through what people are maybe still thinking about, if you have any questions related to your goals, or if you want to test out any with your colleagues on the call. So one question is, how many goals should we have? And that's a great question, and the answer is 1 for the initiative, but you can have as many as you want to have this happen on campus. So we had people workshop goals, 1 goal specifically related to procurement, but they also had goals in the areas of hiring, investment, etc. And so in terms of thinking through which one you submit, if there's kind of a overarching goal, I would submit that one. And if you have sub goals as part of that, feel free to keep us in the loop, but we're just asking for 1 for this. Another question is, where will this PowerPoint be available for download? And we'll be sure to send that out after this webinar, and it will also be on the website for the initiative. So future people who are watching this who couldn't join are also able to access it. So we'll have both the recording and the slides available and circulated. Another question is, can we have different goals for fiscal year 20? Can we change them in the next year? And the answer is yes. These are meant to be useful for you. So if you start working on a goal and you start testing it with your colleagues and you're like, yikes, maybe what we need isn't to have a focus on local hiring, but it's actually to focus on building workforce training opportunities with our partners. You can totally adjust course. Likewise, if you started with, perhaps you started with a procurement goal last year, and now that's running smoothly, you have some things underway, feel free to try something new and shift your area of focus. Again, these goals are really meant for you as a tool on campus to bring people on board, to have people understand what you're working on. We hope that these can kind of provide some tangible grounding as you interact with your colleagues across campus. So feel free to shift focus. The goals will also help us to figure out kind of what makes most sense related to the Anchor Learning Network programming and structure. So by seeing who's working on what, we'll be able to make some of those connections and build an internal infrastructure that can really help make progress on these goals. So I know a number of you have been involved in our peer coaching efforts in the past. And so by having a sense of what everyone's working on, we'll be able to make sure that as we group people together, we're being strategic about that. Another question came through related to whether there's a place where past organizational goals can be viewed. That is a great idea. I don't think we've developed that resource outside of some of the notes from last year's programming, and we will certainly do that and circulate that, and I think that is a really great resource. People put together some really powerful goals, and not only do we have the goals, but we have the results of the voting when we went around and viewed everyone's goals. And we have notes from kind of some of the discussion that went into what makes a powerful goal. And so we can pull some of that together and ensure to group it in with this presentation as well. Another question came in related to whether we can contact Kumu and TDC to share drafts and get feedback. And the answer is yes. We would love to chat through your working goal ideas with you. And I think, again, we have a pretty wide repository of past goals that some of them have really innovative ideas and language. And so we find that talking through some of that and seeing what ideas spark can be really helpful. And again, kind of the spaghetti at the wall approach, so we can share based on where you're at, what other campuses have done, and you can say, that's really not a good fit for us because of this, but maybe we'll try this, or wow, that would be really powerful on our campus too. So please reach out to us and we'd be happy to connect about that. Are there any other questions? Another question is whether goals need to be approved by the president or chancellor. We have found that goals and kind of going through whatever formal processes might exist for other initiatives on campuses can be a really good strategy for building buy-in for this work and getting kind of some of the dedicated staff time and infrastructure. So I think that can be a really powerful tactic. In terms of the goal that you submit, it definitely doesn't need to be approved yet, because we recognize that maybe some people's first goals will be to create the ability to have those direct lines of communication to the president and chancellor about anchor work, and to move kind of from there's buy-in for the anchor mission broadly, but what does this look like? There might need to be some additional steps. So I think it would definitely be powerful to go through kind of getting senior leadership approval for the goal, but for the purposes of directing your own work, you can make it a little bit more insider baseball-y than maybe whatever the public goals are for this initiative on your campus that have been articulated by senior leadership. Another question you might have is, if you have additional questions and want to talk through your working goals, who do you go to? The person at the Democracy Collaborative is myself, and my email is on the screen and will also be circulated. Feel free to reach out. And if you have questions about kind of the logistics of the Anchor Learning Network, Debbie at Kumu is the best person to reach out to, but I'm certainly happy to answer those questions as well. And we will be circulating these materials and be in communication with you as we near the June deadline for the goals. And if at that point you would like to do any additional brainstorming or thinking, happy to do that with you all. And the last thing I'll say is that with these goals, we will be doing the technical assistance around the data collection. So we will be in conversation with you about them. And if through those conversations you realize, oh, I really wish we had made this our goal, that's definitely possible. So again, these should be really useful for you. That's the goal of this, to make sure that you can get the most effective programming possible. So these working goals shouldn't be a point of stress, and we hope that even the process of dialoguing with your colleagues about what you'd like to work on can be helpful for you. Any last questions? Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining today, and thank you to future participants who are watching this. Again, feel free to email me with any questions, ideas. Really love talking and working on working goals, and I'm already really excited about everything that's happening on your campuses and excited to see how these unfold. And these slides, as well as some of the additional resources that we brainstormed on this call related to sharing past goals, will be circulated via email. So thanks so much for joining, everyone, and I will be connecting with you all soon.